I'm Dana Perino, and this is Perino on Politics. One week until President-elect Trump takes office as he readies his day one strategy. Joining me now is editor-in-chief of Jewish Insider and Fox News radio political analyst Josh Kraushaar. Welcome to Perino on Politics, where I call up my smart friends and find out what's on their minds about the state of American politics. Great to be back on with you, Josh Kraushaar, a crowd favorite. I kept this loose in terms of an outline because a lot of it's a little bit of a hurry up and wait. But this transition has been so interesting because it feels like, in many ways, President-elect Trump became president the day after the election.
It really does. And I think it underscores just how vacant President Biden has been throughout much of the last, really since his bad debate performance that led him to drop out of the race. You just haven't seen a whole lot of the sitting president of the United States. I've been struck. We cover at Jewish Insider all the developments in the Middle East, and it's actually been striking to hear people like Steve Witkoff, who's Trump's incoming Middle East advisor, liaison.
He's there in the region, right?
They're in the region. J.D. Vance was on Fox News Sunday talking about the state of the negotiations. So that even before Trump takes office, you're seeing on a policy basis changes already in the works. So it really is striking. There's been a void that the Biden administration has left. And even before Donald Trump is president, even before Inauguration Day, you're seeing movement taking place.
Before we talk more about President Trump and the confirmations to happen this week, or at least the hearings to take place this week on Capitol Hill for his nominations for his cabinet and other important positions, let's talk about Biden for a moment, because he's going to give a big speech. Today is Monday, January 13th, and he's going to spend some time talking about how great his foreign policy legacy is. Now, he always fancied himself as the foreign policy president and the expert in the room. Of course, Robert Gates, the man who served as the Secretary of Defense under Republicans and Democrats, said that Joe Biden had been wrong on every foreign policy decision ever. And today you see David Ignatius, the columnist for the Washington Post, saying, this is not the best legacy to leave on. But President Biden is very defiant on his way out. And in particular, with his policy advisor, Jake Sullivan, over the weekend said, Afghanistan, that was great. All's great. Like, people are going to look back and say, that what a great decision. And there seems to be no willingness to say, could have done some things better. We'll see how history judges it in the long run, something like that. They're just so defiant. And even Biden saying over the weekend that he would have beat Trump, and that he said, and Kamala would have beaten Trump. And I'm like, but sir, she didn't.
Dana, there's a lot of revisionist history going on in the final weeks of the Biden administration, where a lot of his top advisors are trying to cement their legacies, playing for the history books, less about the current moment. But anyone who kind of followed this administration and looked at the politics of the administration could point to the withdrawal from Afghanistan, the chaos that ensued, and the dishonesty, frankly, from some of those very top advisors in what was taking place before our very eyes was when Joe Biden's job approval dropped below 50%. He never really recovered from that moment.
And that was in August of 2021.
That was the first year. Yeah. Inflation certainly was a factor as well. But the lack of, Joe Biden would campaign as being the candidate who would return this country to normalcy, that you wouldn't see the chaos, the daily craziness that he attacked the Trump administration over. And what were we seeing in those weeks of just chaos? And we lost 13 American troops as part of that withdrawal. It was chaos. It was literally looking at your TV and looking at seemingly our country losing its nerve when it came to protecting our interests overseas. So that was the moment politically where things fell apart for Joe Biden. You can look also at, I'm fascinated to see these interviews with Tony Blinken and Jake Sullivan over their record in the Middle East. We'll see what's happening. And there's a lot of developments over a possible hostage deal at the very end of the administration. But I was struck that Tony Blinken was saying in numerous interviews that they made a mistake in not being tough enough on Hamas by putting too much pressure on Israel rhetorically. That gave Hamas a lot of leeway not to come to the bargaining table and really make a deal when it came to the hostages.
Could we talk about that just for a moment? I did want to get your take on this. So Tony Blinken is the Secretary of State and Jake Sullivan is the National Security Advisor. So in the lead up to Biden giving this foreign policy speech, I would say that they're giving some previews, softening up the ground for him. But you do hear that it is possible maybe that there's going to be a ceasefire deal or some sort of hostage release, prisoner exchange. And Mark Halperin in his newsletter today said there's a lot of more cooperation and discussion between the Trump and the Biden teams than you would think. Is it possible, do you believe, from your perch at the Jewish Insider, that this is a real deal? Because it sort of feels like Lucy in the football.
We are hearing from both American and Israeli sources that this is the closest the negotiations have gotten to a possible deal. We're not across the finish line quite yet, but it's on the 5-yard line, and it's closer than it ever has been throughout this administration. Now, there's a lot of speculation that Trump's engaged. It's pretty unusual for a president who's not yet in office to have his own Middle East liaison in Steve Witkoff in the region with the Biden negotiators in Qatar, talking about a possible deal. That's a pretty unprecedented state of affairs where you literally have the Trump and Biden teams working together with the Israelis, with the other interlocutors as trying to get this over the finish line. And you saw J.D. Vance over the weekend talk about how optimistic he was that a deal could get done in the final days of the Biden administration. So, look, I think there's something of a Nixon to China moment, too, coming from Trump. I think Biden didn't have a whole lot of success convincing the Israelis to make certain concessions, and Trump has a very strong record in support of Israel and supporting their security interests. And I think he's given the Israelis and Bibi Netanyahu in particular a little bit of cover to make some concessions that could actually be leading to this momentum. Okay,
so let's then go back to the confirmation hearings this week. President Trump's nominees, many of them had been very quiet at the direction of Susie Wiles, the incoming chief of staff. You don't want to say anything that could disrupt your smooth sailing. If you do indeed have smooth sailing to your confirmation. Pete Hegseth is the former Fox host here, one of our former colleagues. He will go in front of the Senate Armed Services Committee. That you could expect possibly some fireworks from that hearing. But my feeling is that, of course, you never know exactly what's going to happen, but I think it's likely, given the makeup of the Senate right now, that Trump will get most of his nominees confirmed. What do you think?
I think that's a safe bet. John Fetterman is my personal political weather vane on whether the cabinet...
Senator from Pennsylvania, who's a Democrat, and went to Mar-a-Lago last week and broke bread with the president.
He is going to be the Democrat to watch in this sort of transitional period and into the first 100 days of the new administration. But look, he said nice things about a whole lot of the nominees that Trump has appointed. Hegseth had the toughest challenge before he got to the confirmation. I mean, he was dealing with Oppo being thrown at him early on, and he survived that gauntlet. And he's been very good at, I think he's been preparing for the hearing coming up on Tuesday. And I expect him to do quite well. He's going to be throwing a lot of Oppo from Democratic senators. But I think the most challenging part of his confirmation is behind him. That said, the math is tough. It still is tough because all it takes are 4 Republican senators to block any one of these nominees. You have Susan Collins, who's up for re-election in a blue state. You got Lisa Murkowski, who's been a very independent-minded Republican, and you got even people like Mitch McConnell, who on some of the less traditional conservative picks, like a Tulsi Gabbard or an RFK Jr., may want to insert his influence in his final years in the Senate. So the math is narrow. It's going to be tough. Well, I don't think it'll be that tough, but I think the names to watch most closely are RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, namely because these are Democrats. These are folks that don't have the same relationships and have taken positions on some core issues that go against the conservative, traditional conservative positions. Yeah, so I think that's going to take up a lot of time this week. And then I wanted to ask you about what you are thinking about the day one. So a lot of people want to, what are you going to do on day one? Well, there's really only 5 hours of daylight between inauguration at noon
and 5 p.m. before the sun sets. There's a lot of things you could do. Apparently, the Trump team is saying they could have as many as 100 executive orders ready to go on day one. Do you think that's possible?
I do. A lot of this stuff is been set in practice by past administrations, but on border security, I can tell you they already have a whole lot of executive orders ready to go to showcase that they're serious about enforcing the border and deporting criminals here illegally, and perhaps even more than that. Foreign policy, like designating the Houthis, which are causing a whole lot of problems in the Middle East, designating them as a foreign terrorist organization, which the Biden administration almost did, but decided not to go that far. That's something that the Trump administration could do with just one stroke of the pen. There's an energy all these executive orders that Biden put in place on energy regulating gas stoves, putting certain parts of the coast off limits for drilling. I think the process at least is going to begin in rolling those regulations, rolling those executive orders back, and sending a message on that this is a pro-energy, pro-drilling administration. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of things that Trump can do. I think the more important things are going to be legislative, part of his legislative agenda, using what we call the reconciliation process to try to get both immigration policy, extension of the Trump tax cuts, energy deregulation. There are a lot of big things that Trump campaigned on. And right now, the conversation is how Congress can kind of jam all that stuff in legislation in the first year that Trump has.
I'll tell you what, day one will be interesting. And we are back in the that fevered environment where you're like, okay, what's happening next? It feels very exciting if you're in news, because when it's President-elect Trump coming in, there's always going to be a lot of news. Josh Kraushaar, stand by. We'll be right back with more Perino on Politics. And we are back with Perino on Politics. Josh, let's talk about the wildfires in California. Overall thoughts, and then I know this is called Perino on Politics. Maybe let's talk about the leadership situation, and sort of this has built for a while, right? You have a lack of permitting. You have problems with getting things done in California because of lawsuits from environmental groups and the back and forth. You have a lot of people living in a wild urban interface with some very dry conditions. And then you have an overwhelming act of God. What do you think about all of this happening right as President Trump's about to take over?
I can tell you that the relationship between President Trump and California Governor Gavin Newsom is going to be critical into the effectiveness of whether California can rebuild speedily and get rid of.
And what's so interesting about that is Gavin Newsom came out as the first governor after President-elect Trump was reelected and said, I am going to be the defiant one. I will Trump-proof California. Now, this is, of course, before his entire city was burning down, but that's what he said.
Well, that is part of the problem California has had in its governance, and that it's gone so far to the left that they focused more on virtue signaling against Donald Trump than they have in terms of managing an important state and dealing with the day-to-day challenges that any major state has to deal with. So, look, there's going to be a debate over forest management policy, the budget for the fire department, and whether it was cut and not enough to deal with these severe fires, water supply issues. The Santa Ynez Reservoir was offline for repairs for an extended amount of time, which it really hampered the rescue efforts. But one thing we know for sure, Dana, is that California has been one of the most mismanaged states. This is not a partisan issue. The high-speed rail that was promised in the Obama administration, very little of it has been built, and it's been the money that's been spent is insane. Homelessness out of control in the major cities. Progressive prosecutors not enforcing basic laws, allowing shoplifting.
Though they have a new prosecutor in LA. I just interviewed him on America's Newsroom. Nathan Hawkman is his name. Wow, he seemed a lot different than Gascon.
Well, he just got elected because of the backlash. California, Los Angelinos got so sick and tired of the leftist tendencies of their elected officials that he was able to win handily against a progressive Soros-backed progressive prosecutor. But these are bipartisan. You can find commentary from center left and center right that California has been mismanaged. The California has lost under Governor Newsom's tenure, has actually lost population.
They're going to lose congressional seats because of it.
That's unthinkable. Someone who I'll remember California being the fastest growing state. It's unthinkable, but people are voting with their feet, and it's reflective of the mismanagement, the government mismanagement of the state. So it is not too much of an extrapolation to, without being an expert on water policy or forest management policy, to say, well, if they can't manage the basics when it comes to transportation and homelessness, law and order, all those basic things, it's not hard to imagine that they have mismanaged a lot of other things relating to fire control and fire.
Well, and you also have a situation where President-elect Trump had said, we got to cut the budget. And now you're looking at the most expensive natural disaster in American history. And I know that doesn't affect, the fact that they're going to get help. People are going to get help. America will come through for them. But because all the other parts of the budget that President-elect Trump has said is off limits for cuts, it's going to be very hard. And I actually noted last week where Elon Musk said, we're probably not going to be able to cut $2 trillion worth of spending.
Danny, you're pointing to the really interesting tension between two sides of the MAGA coin. The kind of the cutters, the spending cutters, who Elon Musk represents, Vivek Ramaswamy represents, Doge represents. But frankly, politically, it's not easy. You ask any politician, whether you're conservative or liberal, how easy it is to cut spending. And there's a reason why a lot of politicians talk about cutting waste, fraud, and abuse, but not cutting their own favored programs, which was really what you need to do if you actually want serious cuts. So it's going to be challenging to actually implement significant cuts, as Elon Musk has been advocating for. And there are a lot of people that are part of Trump's coalition that actually Trump actually campaigned as someone who was not an entitlement cutter, was not a Paul Ryan Republican, was a different type of Republican who wanted to spend more money and actually have more government. So I actually think that politically speaking, Trump is going to rein in some of the more kind of fiscally conservative elements of his coalition and his advisors.
Do you think that the Republican Party would have a chance at all of making a little bit of a comeback in some places, in some ways, in California after this?
You would think, because you can't. I mean, the Democrats have basically run California like a one-party state, and the battle has been between the moderate Democrats and the left-wing Democrats. The Republicans have been kind of left aside. This should be an opportunity, frankly, for Republicans to stage a comeback. There have been a lot of really popular Republicans that have run for office in California. We've been hearing a lot about Karen Bass's challenger, Rick Caruso, who was not running as a Republican, but is like a moderate Democrat who believes in kind of smart economic principles and smart forest management, as he campaigned on in 2022. I think the type of politicians that make a comeback in California are going to be like Nathan Hawkman, moderate Republicans, moderate Democrats. They may not be running on the Republican label because it's still tough to run as a Republican in California, but certainly the left wingers, the people, the Gavin Newsoms, the George Gascons, the left wing elements of the party are going to be being held accountable.
Do you think that this disaster and the management of it will prevent Gavin Newsom from being a possible candidate for the Democratic primary in 2028? I know that's asking you for a crystal ball that might not even exist yet, but thought I'd throw it out there.
I don't see how Gavin Newsom, even before the fires, how voters in this country, after rejecting another California liberal who was vice president in Kamala Harris, why they would go towards someone who's been in office and has governed at a time when California has lost population, has dealt with crises very ineffectively. I don't know what is Gavin Newsom's campaign message. He is the stereotype of what Republicans are most eager to run against. So the notion that he's if Democrats go with Gavin Newsom in 2028, they're asking for being in the wilderness for a long time.
Oh, see, this is why you come to Perino on Politics. You get the straight scoop from Josh Kraushaar and other friends of mine. We'll be right back with the last segment of Perino on Politics. And we're back. And Josh, I wanted to ask you, as we head into the inauguration of the 47th and 45th president, President-elect Trump, what are things that you're paying attention to that I might not have on my radar?
Well, I think one of the big storylines I'm following closely is whether Trump is actually going to be serious about reaching out to some of the moderate Democrats on both the Senate and House side. And one thing that is there's been this tendency to assume that everything Trump does is going to be jamming partisan bills down Washington's throat. The reality is that there are 10 Democratic senators that represent states that Donald Trump carried in the election. That's more than we've seen in quite some time. So, and you do the math, and I don't have to get too wonky, Dana, but you've got 53 Republican senators, and then you've got 10 Trump state Democratic senators. That's 63 senators that are possible part of a possible filibuster-proof majority that could actually get some serious legislation passed beyond just the reconciliation process. And I think if Donald Trump and Republicans in Congress think about the long game, they really could have an opportunity to put pressure on those moderate Democrats, build these bigger coalitions, and not just play the partisan playbook that they did so often in the first term. You already saw in the Laken Riley Act, which had its first vote, procedural vote. A lot of Democrats were under pressure to support it, and they ended up. These are not like senators who have a great record on immigration, but Elisa Slotkin, Ruben Gallego, they saw the political writing on the wall and they joined with Donald Trump in saying they support the legislation, and all the Republicans, of course. So I think there are some opportunities for bipartisan coalitions. There are 13 Democrats in the House that are in Trump districts, but the Senate is going to be a real opportunity. John Fetterman already, he was at Mar-a-Lago this past week. There are Democratic senators, even if they don't love Donald Trump, they understand that they need to win swing voters, and they can't just be part of the resistance to get.
Do you have any thoughts about who will emerge as the head of the Department of National, the Democratic National Committee, the DNC?
Ben Wickler, from my reporting, it seems to be he's the Wisconsin Democratic chairman. Seems to be the early favorite, but let me tell you, Dana, this is not a DNC that is trying to moderate.
No, because I learned more about him. I'm really interested in Wisconsin, and I learned more about him. He's very progressive.
He headed MoveOn.org.
Yeah.
I think a lot of moderates are okay with him because he's a believer in the big tent. He wants to have.
And he's a little bit of a mild-mannered speaker.
And look, for those jobs, you don't need to be a famous politician. You need to be an organizer. You need to be someone who can manage and organize. But the problem is he's demonstrated, and a lot of the leading candidates, by the way, have demonstrated a pandering to these progressive activists. That is the major problem for why the party wasn't able to win a majority in the last election. He put out a tweet over the weekend about like every identity group that needs to be part of the DNC process, and that identitarianism is a big obstacle to Democrats being the party of everyone in the country. Yeah. We've actually covered on the Middle East, on Israel and anti-Semitism. We interviewed him, and he said he didn't want to. He wanted to actually invite an anti-Israel speaker to speak at the DNC, and they did not allow that at this past convention in Chicago. So, for all the talk that Democrats are moving to the middle, and they certainly have an opportunity to do so, and it's in their political interest to move to the middle, we're not seeing any signs that these DNC candidates for chairman are taking that same lesson. And
that election takes place February 1st. That's the DNC's leadership election. I will see you next week in Washington, Josh. Thank you.
Happy inauguration.
Okay, go have a good day, and thank you so much. Let's pray for those hostages. If we might have news on that this week, we'll do another podcast if so. Thank you so much. Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.